Hey guys, it's Alex, and today I'm here with a book review for The Rest of the Story by Sarah Dessen. This is a young adult contemporary romance novel about a 17-year-old girl named Emma Saylor, whose mother died when she was young, and she then became estranged from her mother's family. When her father is going out of the country, she goes to stay with her mother's family for the summer, and learns a lot about herself, her mother, her family, and also happens to meet a very cute boy. I am a big fan of Sarah Dessen. I always have been. She writes really wonderful young adult contemporary romance novels. If you're interested in the genre, I definitely recommend checking out some of her work, but I gave this book 3 stars. I think of her last couple new releases, this has been my favorite, but I still had a number of issues. For starters, there's a fairly decent class discussion in this book. Emma comes from an upper middle class family, or potentially just upper class. It was kind of hazy on how much money her family had, but she was significantly wealthier than her mother's side of the family, who were very blue-collar working class people. Sarah Dessen has done this in her books before, and it has been interesting, although I don't think it worked as well as she wanted it to in this book. I understand what she was going for, and a lot of it was fairly well done, but it kind of lost me when at times it was a little bit over the top. Like, Emma would be talking to one of her new friends, and she would be talking to him about college, and he would just make a comment about how he was looking at applying to state schools instead of out-of-state schools just because it was cheaper, and she would just react with surprise and shock like, oh my god, I'd never thought of that before. And that struck me as kind of unrealistic. Like, even coming from a wealthier family where money's not an issue, I still feel like that's some basic knowledge that you would know. Like, even if you don't have to, like, factor it into your own decision, like, you go to a public high school, that seems like fairly basic knowledge that would have been imparted on you by now. Also, all the rich people in this book were jerks. I didn't explain this well at the beginning, but she's visiting at a lake, and there are 2 sides of the lake. There's the blue-collar, working-class side of the lake, and then there's the wealthy resort side of the lake. And sometimes her family is from the blue-collar side, and her father stays at the resort side. So they do interact with each other, and the teenagers like hang out together and stuff. And there were some rich people in this book who were just kind of crappy people, which was fine. But there were some rich people who were very kind, caring, considerate people until it suited the story for Emma to learn a lesson about money, and then they would just randomly turn into jerks even though it didn't fit with their prior characterization at all. They would go out of their way to help people and be lovely, and then all of a sudden, they would just turn into jerks for no reason, just because Emma had to learn a lesson. And that kind of bugged me a lot. I understand what she was going for. It was just very heavy-handed, and it didn't work when I didn't buy into those characters. She could have easily made the point about class without having just all the rich people act like jerks. Or alternatively, could have just cast rich jerks in this instead of nice people who then randomly acted as jerks when the plot called for it. I also felt like there were too many characters in this book. To a degree, it was intentional, but it's something I've had a problem with in some of Sarah Dessen's other books as well, but it was just incredibly apparent here. Emma is visiting her family who she doesn't know, so for essentially the first time, she is meeting her grandmother, all her cousins friends, all the people at the lake, the boys from the resort side who she dates, and their friends, and it's just a lot of people in this book. And I had a really hard time following them and keeping track of who everyone was, and it was like halfway through the book and she would mention someone's name and I wouldn't know who that person was, or if they were related to her, or how they were related to her. There was just way too many people. Literally, for about the first 80 pages of this book, I thought her love interest was one of her cousins, just because it wasn't explained very well, and there were so many people that I was mixing them all up, and it was a really hard mental leap to go from thinking he's her cousin to realizing he's the love interest, and that made it hard to get into their relationship a lot as well. There were a lot of cases where she introduced 2 people when one person could have filled the role just fine, or there were people who had unnecessarily small roles in the book who really didn't need to be there at all, who didn't contribute anything. And it was way too much for me to follow, and I couldn't get invested in the characters who were actually important. And I wasn't the biggest fan of the romance in this. I had kind of an issue just like with the thinking he was her cousin was kind of hard to get into. Like, it's difficult to change your perspective to go from cousin to, oh, they're kissing now. But there was also this one super cringy scene where Emma was kind of dating a boy from the resort side, and he asked her to a dance. She had to buy a dress, but she was afraid of driving, so the love interest, who was not the boy who asked her to the dance, drove her to help her go pick out a dress. And while they were in the dress shop, the saleswoman said, "Oh, it's so nice that your boyfriend is here helping you pick out a dress. I love seeing that." And they kind of went along with it, which I understand that trope. I do kind of like that trope. It's cute that, like, they're both fantasizing about their relationship, but they're not actually ready to have the conversation and take that step yet. I appreciate that trope. It just doesn't work when she's literally preparing for a date with another guy. It made me super uncomfortable, and it made me not like either of them, especially her. It's not a cute trope in that situation. It's just cringy because she's literally getting ready for a date with another guy while flirting with this one guy, and I was not a fan. And just in general, their relationship almost seemed kind of unnecessary to the story. And if the relationship part had just been removed, it would have been a story entirely about character development and her getting to know her family. And I almost think I would have liked that better. Another small thing is Emma's sense of humor. She was constantly referred to as being super funny, but people didn't get her sense of humor. And you had to be a special kind of person to get her sense of humor. So of course, all of the, like, good people who she met in this book who became her close friends, they all got her sense of humor perfectly, whereas, like, the people who were kind of jerks or didn't understand her didn't get her sense of humor. And it was really annoying when I was one of those people who didn't think she was funny. I got the joke she was making, I got that it was a joke. It was also constantly explained that it was a joke, which was annoying. It didn't need to be pointed out every time she made a sarcastic comment that it was indeed a joke. But I just didn't think it was funny. And it got annoying when I was told this character was so funny, and I was just sitting there like, no, she's not. Which I get is just like, my sense of humor didn't mesh with hers, which is fine. It was just annoying because it was constantly pointed out how super funny she was, and how all the great people in this book got her humor, and all the crappy people did not get her humor. And yeah, it was a small thing. It didn't bother me too much, but it was just like mildly annoying. But, like, honestly, none of those things were a huge deal. Like, I can go on and on about, like, all the little nitpicky things I thought about this book and all the small problems I had, but none of those things were a big, like, book-ruining deal. Like, oh my god, that's terrible. That makes me go from, like, a 5 star down to a 2. Like, none of them were bad. This was a fine book. If you like YA contemporaries, I'd recommend this book, and you would probably enjoy it more than me, because my main problem with this book was the fact that Sarah Dessen is someone who I have read a lot. I have read all of her books that have been published, and she's been publishing for 20 years now. Probably more than 20 years, honestly. She started in the late 90s, and I've read them all. And she has found a formula that works for her. It's a good formula, but I've read this formula many, many times now. And it's not even just the formula. It's that she's recycling the same elements at this point. Almost every element in this book I could pick out and point to as being from one of her other books. Not every single one, but the majority of them. It would be, oh, they have this end of summer prom at the resort. Like, oh, well, that was in Along for the Ride. And there were all these discussions on class issues and her going from one class to a different class to stay with different people who were family that she was estranged from. And it was like, oh, that was in Lock and Key, and she has this relationship with this boy, and this boy is acting exactly like the love interest from The Truth About Forever, and it was like every single element of this book I could point to as being from another book that I had read, and in most cases had enjoyed more. And I think this is the problem that I've had with the last couple Sarah Dessen books as well, is that they're not bad. Her books aren't getting any worse, it's just that I'm enjoying them less and less because I've read all of her books, and they're all starting to sound the same. And I have been rereading the old ones that were favorites of mine back in the day, and they still hold up to me now. It's just the new ones don't seem like they're adding anything to me. But if you haven't read literally all of Sarah Dessen's works, I feel like you would enjoy this a lot more because these elements would be new to you, and they're not bad elements. I've just seen her do them before. So I think this is probably going to be the last Sarah Dessen book I read, unless there's something that sounds particularly amazing about one of her new ones that happens in the future. But I think I've been reading Sarah Dessen for too long now. I think just as a reader, I've kind of worn her out for myself. But I still think she's wonderful. This book was good. It was just more of a me problem than like a book problem. So take that with a grain of salt. I would recommend Sarah Dessen if you're into young adult contemporary romance because I think she's wonderful, but I think I might be done with her. Let me know down below if you've read the rest of the story and what you thought of it if you have. And as always, thank you guys so much for watching, and I will see y'all again soon.